So when I was in second grade, I was invited to make my first communion early. The rest of my class in my very small Catholic school would still wait and have their first communion a few months later at the regular time. But there apparently there was something about me that said I didn't need to wait anymore for this important rite of passage. I had a special mass set aside where I would make my first communion. As an adult, I've tried to make sense of this. I've asked my mom to try to explain, and all she says is, well, I guess you were advanced. I was 7. Regardless, I took that invitation to make my first communion early very seriously, and I worked really hard to prepare. I set up a meeting with my priest. I had some questions. I'd written them out all in advance with room after each question for his answer. So I hand wrote that question and left some space. The next question. It was a pretty long list. I don't remember exactly, but 10 or 12 questions. But I do remember what I thought of as the most important question, which was, how do I become a famous saint? In my 7-year-old mind, faith and achievement were one and the same, which, as you can see from the story, how I might think that. Spirituality was a destination, and there were clear measures of success along the way. Sainthood, for example. And I was determined to succeed. Rather than how big is your soul, I was sure the more relevant question was something more like, how close are you to the top? Many of us, long past the second grade, think of spiritual growth and really any kind of human growth like this, that it is linear, upwards, unidirectional. Our Western culture teaches us that this is how life really is, after all, that there's a moment of a beginning, a middle, and an end, single direction, single march upwards and onwards forever, as Unitarian James Freeman Clarke wrote. Our stories are told this way, and we imagine our lives unfolding this way, which means that if at some point in our single straight path towards enlightenment, we come to change our beliefs, especially in a pretty significant way, if we change what we think of as right or wrong, or when we start to reject old tools and embrace new ones for making meaning, we tend to understand these things as a kind of spiritual do-over. When the path of spiritual development is only linear and one way, a change in some core belief or affiliation can only mean that you are starting over, totally rejecting that prior path, often with a degree of scorn at that past way of belief, or even shame. Now, this doesn't just happen with religious beliefs. This week, as many of us sit down to dinner with family and friends, we will encounter again that old familiar story of Thanksgiving. I remember the first few Thanksgiving I came home to after being at college, after having finally learned the truth about this story. The lie about this story, that there was some sort of make nice between the Puritans and the Native Americans over corn and mashed potatoes. I had every defense up around the whole experience, and I looked with a sort of disdain on anyone who seemed to be enjoying themselves. How could they believe this garbage? I was grateful that I had outgrown these old beliefs and moved on. A number of years ago, I was at Pride in Denver. Now, it's hard to remember now, but for a long time, it would have been almost unbelievable to think that churches would show up at Pride. Other than as protesters. Now, churches and religious groups show up in full force, waving flags and banners, but for a long time, most of Pride's history, it was very rare. But this one year, I remember suddenly the Metropolitan Community Church, the MCC, or what most Christians and most queers think of as the gay church. That year, the gay church seemed to be everywhere. And unlike the leather daddies and the dykes on bikes, this was one group that made me feel really uncomfortable. I looked at their marchers with a kind of pity and fear and anger. Gay Christians? I mean, why do they even try? Are they so self-hating and self-punishing that they must worship the very God that fuels fear and judgment against them? I felt entirely satisfied with my own progress and having outgrown those beliefs, and only wondered why they hadn't. A few summers later, with my bare feet hanging over a small basin of water, my body remembered why. I was by then in my second year of seminary, what some might call a significant step in the progress of spiritual success. Except by then, I had started to have the sense that all my past spiritual paths weren't entirely in the rear view mirror. Instead of a continuous linear progress on a single path, I had started to feel surrounded by unresolved stories and frameworks for making meaning that, despite my every intention to leave these wrong-headed and even harmful notions in the past, they kept showing up, especially in times of grief or struggle, or when I'd go searching for a way to make sense of life's challenges, or when I needed to provide comfort. Old notions laden with shame would worm their way in, or a longing for ritual would appear like in my bones, or my cynicism and self-satisfaction would come up against my desire for connection, especially as I tried to grow into my new role as a minister. These past understandings and experiences would come haunting me like ghosts of my religious and philosophical past. Maybe no more than on that day in that large sanctuary, I had been led there to this back corner by a new friend, a Catholic woman, also in her second year of seminary, a Catholic woman in her second year of seminary. She had found me there amongst the many people traveling this large space as a part of an innovative ecumenical worship service at the end of a week-long retreat for people considering congregational ministry. Echoing through this space were sweet and spontaneous bursts of chanting, sudden and mournful hymns, hopeful melodies, all unplanned and breathed into being only by way of the mysterious combination of bodies that filled the room, their stories, their experiences, the things that lived in them. Who started the singing? What were we singing? Who ended each song? No one, and yet everyone knew. At one point, one of my other new friends, I heard her burst out into what I now understand as speaking in tongues. In one corner of the space, there was a progressive form of confession set up, and another a candle for meditation, along with the book Dr. Seuss's Oh, the Places You'll Go. It was set open like scripture. In the center, people were slowly walking around a large labyrinth. Up on a balcony, there were tools for coloring mandalas and for making prayer beads. And in every other corner of this vast space, so many other simultaneous opportunities for reflection and healing and gratitude and communion. In every pew, the stunning variety of humanity seeking the holy. I was taking it all in, trying to sort through my own reactions, the way that each of these experiences were bringing up past stories, past ways of being, past rituals that lived in me. I was feeling awe and gratitude and also resistance and disorientation when my friend came and tapped me on the shoulder and whispered, "Can I wash your feet?" I had been in every corner of the worship space by then, except intentionally that part. I mean, that part that was filled with Jesus. Jesus, who I had long ago outgrown. Stations of the cross, a giant crucifix laid out on the floor with people kneeling there in, I don't know, adoration. And then there were those chairs and the basins with a pitcher of water and towels, all of these things solidly from my past. Can I wash your feet? Yes. She took me by the hand and led me to a chair where she took off my shoes and placed my feet in the warm water gently and then wiped them clean. As she worked, I felt a sense of everything coming together in me. These years of Holy Weeks growing up, where 12 women and men would come to the front of my Catholic church and awkwardly take off their shoes and socks to have their feet washed by the elders, the leaders of the church. The words from the Gospel of John, "Lord, do you wash my feet?" The alienation I felt knowing the Catholic Church did not want me as me, the ways my church helped my parents justify the terrible things that they said and did to me and my partner in those early years. The patriarchy that had finally pushed me away, and also my friend here tenderly washing my feet. This devout Catholic woman who had remained loyal to the church, feeling a call to priesthood, unwilling to be turned away. She claimed a wholeness in the midst of this tradition that would prefer to split her, as if it was the most simple and obvious thing to do. In that moment, she was a priest in the truest sense. She took my feet in her hands, and I felt every part of the ritual as it was intended: humility, forgiveness, healing, love. All the stories and experiences that live deep in me that I had thought of as entirely past, that I had outgrown. All of these came rushing into my body, except they were ghosts that were not just haunting me, but offering themselves like a gift. After he rejects the Jack and the Beanstalk as an image for spiritual growth, Rob Hardy's turns instead to another story a lot of us will be encountering in the coming weeks. That is The Grinch That Stole Christmas. He says, "Perhaps you remember the moment near the end of Dr. Seuss's beloved Christmas tale when the Grinch rides his sleigh up Mount Crumpet. And just before he's about to jettison the gifts, he pauses to listen for the weeping of the Who's down in Whoville. He expects to hear the weeping, and he hears singing instead. At first, that singing, it doesn't make any sense to Mr. Grinch, but he finally understands," Dr. Seuss tells us. And then the Grinch's small heart grew 3 sizes that day. For a lot of us, we assume that the only way to deal with the ghosts of our past beliefs or our past selves is in a posture of weeping. I mean, like Mr. Grinch, I thought if I listened closely enough to the stories of those gay Christians, I would too hear eventually their grief, their crying. And sometimes there is. The pain and harm from our religious past is very real and requires intentional work of tending and healing. And also, alongside the weeping, there is also often singing, because we don't actually grow our souls in a straight line. We don't grow ourselves in a straight line. We grow more in a pattern, like one of my favorite playwrights, Susan Laurie Parks, what she calls rep and rev, or repetition and revision. Influenced by jazz and the use of a similar musical refrain in repetition with slight revisions each time, she talks about rep and rev as a drama of accumulation. The story is not one of traveling of beginning, middle, end from A to B, but rather from A to A to A to B to A to B to C to A. Our path of spiritual growth doesn't start all over with each discovery or change of heart. Each new experience meets with the past, and we repeat and revise and grow and become. Rather than imagining that we are ascending vertically toward a single destination, we need to understand our growth as growing in every dimension, in an ever expanding embrace of contradictions and tensions, so that we might embrace more and more of the world and of life. There is a deep humility required in understanding growth like this. It asks us to center mystery in every direction and in every part of ourselves. Now, despite what you might think, as a progressive faith movement, Unitarian Universalists have really struggled to practice this sort of humility, of centering mystery. For example, when we embraced a humanist-centered religious path in the 1930s, many understood it as a break from the past centuries of Unitarian Christianity. That is, a discovery entirely rational and scientifically sound, a new start on a new path towards spiritual success, again, onward and upward forever. But in reality, our humanist impulses were not actually an entirely new path. They were more so a re-engagement of our long and winding past that prioritized humanity and relationships and a this-worldly justice. They were a repetition of the past and a revision. A to B to A to C to B to C to D, rep and rev. The writers of the Humanist Manifesto didn't think of it like this. However, they were set on drawing a line between those past paths and this new and real truth, which is why maybe their manifesto failed to engage what humanist William Schultz describes as the interior haunts of the unconscious, of guilt, of passion, and pain, which are so central in the Christian belief system they were trying so hard to entirely reject. Staking their claim in the realm of this entirely new path, they missed the chance to meet our tradition's ghosts, not just as grief, but as gifts. They missed the chance to meet, not just hear the weeping, but to hear the song. If we were to attempt writing that humanist manifesto today, however, I'm not sure it is possible that we would forget to talk about pain. The realities we face in our everyday push us to confront so much, too much, that breaks our hearts. It would be simpler in today's reality, of course, to just pick a narrative, a single belief system that is black and white with tools that are confident and clear to say, we have arrived. The good guys and the bad guys, we got them sorted out. The good guys are rewarded, the bad guys are punished. It would be easier to declare that what we know now and this place where we've arrived is and will ever stay righteous and right. Especially after the news, like with the Kyle Rittenhouse verdict this week, to hold the reality of his vigilante racism wrapped in righteousness, the reality of all who lift him up as some sort of hero, to hold this alongside the reality of the harm he caused and the harm the system that was designed to protect him has caused for generations, to let all of this into our hearts without closing off to anyone or anything, to grow souls that can hold this much complexity and tensions together, it can feel impossible and too much to ask of our weary hearts. Which brings me back to the Thanksgiving story we will all encounter in one way or another this week. Despite a general awareness of the ways this story is untrue and harmful, the myth persists in the hearts of many of us today. There's a power in it that we just can't quite shake. And I've come to believe that it's because even though it isn't true, there is a value within this story that continues to resonate. something that we want to claim as the heart of why we gather. Values of hospitality across difference and gratefulness for life's gifts. Values of the simple act of sitting together for a meal. Alongside the weeping, there is also song. And so rather than attempting to reject this story entirely with a kind of smug confidence, as if it is the ghost we have outgrown, we can acknowledge the ways that the story still lives in us. Engaging the ghosts of our past beliefs in this way requires a deeper reckoning and acknowledgement of not just that singing, but also the harm that was caused, the harm that still lives among us now, including as evidenced by the events in Kenosha. It requires us to keep remembering that alongside those gifts, there still is that grief. The call of courageous love is to hold all of these things together, to take stock fully of those ghosts of our religious and philosophical past, the past selves, individually, collectively, to meet them all with that wonder and awe, trembling and humility that I remember so well feeling in that vast worship space many years ago. The call of courageous love is a call to hold all of these things together, to withstand the pain of life, all of it, while also still holding on to the thread of life's beauty. We need a faith that invites us to put everything on the table, a faith that acknowledges and brings in all these ghosts of our past selves, our past beliefs, our past ways of being, and tends fully to the harm while not letting go of the hope. We need a faith where nothing is off limits, a faith where we can grow our souls in 3D, holding on to that mystery in every direction, a faith where we can turn to every tool, every way of making meaning, so that we can keep learning, keep becoming, keep loving more and more of this broken and still beautiful world. May it be so, and amen.